Hey everybody, this is the new 2021 Ritchey Ascent, which is a bike that's come and gone from Ritchey's lineup since its original run back in the mid-1980s, and I've managed to get a hold of this beauty for a few weeks to do some testing and review. But before we go any further, can we just take a moment to appreciate all the freaking bling on this build? Now I'll have several videos showcasing each one of the noteworthy specialty components on the bike, but briefly we have a custom-built set of Philwood wheels, Paul Clamper mechanical disc brakes and levers, a Paul Thummy thumb shifter adapter, White Industries bottom bracket and cranks, and some uber supple Rene Hurst 650B by 55mm tires. All I can really say is, holy crap, this thing's been fun to ride so far. Now I also have a full review of the bike in the works, but one of the really interesting things about this particular frame is the geometry, which isn't quite like anything else on the market. Now it's not a gravel bike, but it's also not a mountain bike, at least by today's standards. So what is the Ritchey Ascent exactly? I don't really know yet, but for now I'm calling it a mountain touring adventure bike, but that kind of brings up an interesting question. Do you run this bike with flat handlebars or drop handlebars? And which one makes more sense for this type of bike? Well, I can't answer those questions just yet, but I can say that this frame set certainly encourages the rider to build it up in either option. So, after the longest intro ever, in this video I'll show you how to convert the new Ritchey Ascent, or really any bike for that matter, from flat handlebar to drop handlebar, or vice versa, and highlight a few things that you should know if you plan to do something similar on your bike. So first, let's talk shifting. Now after you pull off the flat handlebars, the grips, and the levers, you can install your drop handlebar of choice. But unless you're running a single-speed drivetrain, you're going to need a way to change your gears. Now typically a flat bar or mountain bike shifter would look something like this, and really wouldn't fit well on a drop handlebar. Now on the other hand, a typical drop bar shifter is often integrated into the brake lever, and looks something like this. Now in any case, if you're using either one of these types of shifters, they really aren't cross-compatible between handlebar styles, but there is another option. The humble bar end friction shifter is, I would say, making a bit of a comeback in recent years. Now sure, a dedicated drop bar or mountain bike shifter is purpose-built and can look pretty slick, but the sheer number of drivetrain options that you have these days is staggering. So instead of having to buy a brand new shifter anytime you want to change the gearing on your bike, you could go with the essentially universal, brand-agnostic friction shifter, which works with basically any derailleur and essentially any number of gears. And very importantly, it can be configured for use with either flat bars or drop bars. Now for flat bars, this particular build employs the nifty Thummy adapter from Paul Components, which allows you to mount a bar end shifter to a flat bar in a thumb shifter configuration. Now one thing to know here is that the Thummy adapter comes with an integrated barrel adjuster to fine-tune the cable tension, which you still want even if you're using a friction shifter, as you may need to fine-tune the overall range of the derailleur. Also, this particular microshift bar end shifter is actually really cool, as it allows you to switch between fully manual friction mode and indexed mode, which does require more precise cable tension adjustment. Anyways, the bar end configuration doesn't actually have a barrel adjuster, nor does the Shimano Diori mountain derailleur that we're using here. So in addition to swapping to the bar end configuration, I've also spliced in an inline barrel adjuster for the derailleur. Now this is definitely something that I recommend if your derailleur doesn't have a barrel adjuster, as making micro adjustments simply won't be possible otherwise. Not a big deal though, these things cost a few bucks and are widely available. Now another thing you might consider is the housing length. Now since I'm running the shifter cable underneath the handlebar tape, it required a bit more housing than in flat bar mode. But not really a big deal in this case since I was already adding the barrel adjuster. So for me, it was just a matter of cutting the existing housing and adding a longer piece on the opposing side. Now you might be able to reuse the inner shift cable, but if you did need to lengthen the housing by any appreciable amount, then it's also very likely that you'll need a new inner cable as well. Finish it off by clipping the excess and installing a cable crimp, or in my case here, reinstalling the blingy matchy cable cherry, which actually belongs to Russ from Path Less Pedaled, from whom I'm borrowing the bike while he and Laura are visiting SoCal. Thanks, Russ. And if you want a very detailed rundown on what a cable cherry is and how it works, definitely check out Queercyclist's latest video, linked in the description. Okay, so that's pretty much shifting all sorted with minimal hardware required, thanks to the use of the simple bar end friction shifter. To summarize, all we needed was a bit more housing, an inline barrel adjuster, and a fresh inner cable. So then, that leaves the brakes. Now it is nice that the Ascent frame is all externally routed, meaning you don't need to deal with any internal cable routing. But that doesn't mean that a handlebar conversion will necessarily be easy. Now for instance, if you run hydraulic disc brakes of any kind, you're likely going to have to switch the lever style from a flat bar lever to a drop bar lever. And even though you don't need to worry about internal routing, you'll still need to open the brake fluid system and re-bleed the brake after you switch lever styles, which is not super conducive to a quick and dirty bar swap. Now, the alternative, of course, is if you use mechanical disc brakes, like for instance the super bling, highly coveted Paul clampers here. Then swapping levers is as simple as, well, swapping the levers. Now really, it basically is that simple with just a couple of nuances that you might want to consider. Now first is the inner cable length. Even if you reuse the existing housing exactly as is, when you convert from flat bar to drop bar, or more specifically from a flat bar brake lever to a drop bar brake lever, you'll find that the amount of exposed inner cable from the cable head to the housing is much longer on the drop bar lever. In other words, on the flat bar lever, that exposed distance is from the cable mounting point to the lever's barrel adjuster, or about this much length. Now on the drop bar lever, the distance is much greater, nearly double in this case. Now what this means is that even if you try and reuse the inner brake cable, you'll almost certainly come up short when converting from flat to drop bar levers. However, this point is essentially moot as the actual cable head is different on flat bar levers and drop bar levers. Now the cylindrical cable head is meant for mountain bike levers, while the rounded dome-shaped head is meant for road style levers. And of course, they aren't really compatible. Now you might be able to get away with using a mountain brake cable in a road lever, but it's not advised, and you certainly can't use a road cable head in a mountain bike lever. It just doesn't really fit. So all of this to say, even if you're using mechanical disc brakes, it's still recommended to use the proper inner brake cable when doing the conversion. Again, not a big deal, just something to know. And then of course, in my case, don't forget to reinstall Russ's blingy matchy-matchy cable cherries. Side note, it really is pretty amazing how well these match the other purple anodized parts on this build. Then of course is the issue of pull ratio, which is basically defined by how much inner cable is displaced per unit distance of lever pull. Now thankfully, in a world of a million different bike standards, there are generally only two pull ratios for brakes. You got short pull and long pull. And then of course Campy, which uses like a slightly different ratio. Did that sound bitter? Now in most cases, the only thing you'll have to do is to match the pull ratio of your brake to that of the lever. Now in the case of this build, these Paul clampers are set up with a short pull lever arm, and in flat bar mode, they're mated to the short pull canty levers. Now when we switch to drop bars, you just have to make sure that the drop bar brake lever you're using is also short pull, which is the case for nearly all drop bar mechanical brake levers, with the exception of a couple. So in this conversion, we're totally set, and all we need to do is switch from the flat bar lever to these basic SRAM drop bar brake levers. Of course, making sure to use an inner cable with the proper head. Anyways, so that's brakes. Super simple swap when using cable actuated discs. And really, for my money, these clampers are amazingly strong. And while they don't modulate quite the same as hydraulic disc brakes, it didn't stop me from ripping around my local trails with full confidence. Anyways, all that remains at this point is to tape up the bars and call it a day. Now the method that I'm using here is called the figure 8 bar wrap method, and while everyone has their own preferred method of wrapping bars, the figure 8 method, in my opinion, is just the cleanest and simplest. Now I'll have a video pretty soon detailing how to do the figure 8 wrap method, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. And that is about it. Converting from flat bars to drop bars can be pretty simple, and on a bike like the new Ritchey Ascent is likely something that you'll want to experiment with. Keys for keeping it as simple as possible are to use friction shifting and to use mechanical disc brakes, both of which are things that some may deem old-fashioned or somehow inadequate by today's standards, but I wouldn't be so quick to disregard them. Modern instances of these components like the Paul clampers and the microshift bar end shifters are super well designed and offer a huge advantage in functionality and convenience over their sleeker, more proprietary counterparts. Now I just need to get some decent miles in on the Ascent in drop bar mode, and then I'll be ready to put out a full review. Now in the meantime, keep an eye out for a few videos showcasing the blingier components on this bike, and thanks for watching. And thanks for subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.